Hi, everybody. So, for my paper topic, I am looking at digital language, so language that is associated with social media and texting and kind of this new age language, and looking at how that affects our students' writing. And so, I want to look at, their grammar skills, how those are being affected, and spelling, and just how they are communicating through this kind of new form of communication. And so I also want to look at kind of on the other side of that, how we as teachers, how that also affects our teaching of, especially English teachers, that affects our teaching of these writing skills in the classroom, and how we can kind of almost use this new language in the classroom to better help students and kind of engage them in what it is that they're already doing every single day on their phones or on their computers. And so for my first source, I found 8 total so far. And so, which I feel like I probably have a few more. I just haven't decided for sure if I want to use them or not. But I've decided on 8 right now that I think will be beneficial. And so the first one is, and for short, the title is Demystifying Digitalk. And so it kind of talks about, and this source is from the Journal of Digital Literacy, and it kind of talks about what Digitalk is, which is this kind of new language that we're, coming into with all of these new digital communication devices. And so it talks about that type of language, and I feel like this is probably one of my most useful sources because it touches on several things that I want to talk about, and so it's kind of almost like a foundational source for me. And so it does talk about how teens may not be using the standard written English in their communication and social media and texting, and instead they're using this idea of digitalk, and so kind of shortening words and things like that to communicate. But it also talks about how that can actually be used to help students kind of address audiences, differing audiences, and then learning how to change their voice depending on that audience and the way that they speak. And so kind of bringing that into the classroom, that's kind of how I want to tie in that idea of using this digitalk and tying that into the classroom, and just kind of looking at how it's affecting the way that they are able to write, whether it be positive or negative. And then for another source that I have, this one is Technology in the Future of Language Teaching. And actually another source that I have that kind of goes along with this one is Writing for the Instant Messaging and Text Messaging Generation. And so both of these kind of talk about how texting and social media in the classroom can help teach them how to address these different audiences. So kind of going off of that first source and focusing more on the teacher and how the teacher can handle kind of going about this new language and how to implement that into our classroom, because these kids are using digital devices every single day. And so if we can kind of teach them how to, or really we learn how to teach them through this new means, this new language, and kind of engaging them in that way, since it's, definitely an interest for them, while still not, giving up any kind of standard writing, and we can kind of use that together and kind of teach them with both, then and that's what both of these sources kind of talk about, is more of the teaching side of it and how we can kind of implement that in our teaching. And then a bigger chunk of the sources that I have, so 5 of the sources that I found talk about different like aspects of their writing and how that is the actual effects of the digitalk and this digital communication and how that's affecting these different aspects. So let's see, for one of them, it actually talks about the punctuation aspect, and so how we can actually use like the emoticons and things, and that is kind of almost becoming their punctuation in text messaging or in social media. They'll use, an emoticon at the end of their sentence as kind of an evoking of emotion, rather than like if it was an exclamation point or a period or a question, they have some kind of a face on there that represents the emotion they feel at the end of that sentence. And so kind of using that to elicit and communicate to others how they're feeling, or how that what they're trying to say, and using that more emotion in that way. And so another one of those sources talks about actually the benefits of having students in text messaging and social media. They're creating and kind of showing more creativity in their words, and by creating new words. And so by creating these new words, so things like one of the examples it uses is like even the word like smog, and creating the word smoke and fog, using that to create the word smog, and just how students are putting things together all the time, especially with the word Instagram. Everything's Insta this, Insta that, and so kind of putting these things together is kind of showing a practice with language, and they're getting a little bit more creative in that. And so that's what one of the articles talks about, with kind of using this language for their creativity. And then I have another one that talks about grammar, and so kind of their use of non-conventional grammar practices and things in their texting and their social media, and not always following, like I said before, the standard written English, so following all the grammatical rules. But a lot of this source actually talks about how that's not necessarily it's not always intentional. They're not always trying to it's not because they don't know the right rules. It's just a matter of being quick, being fast, or they're trying to fit it into 140 characters. And so trying to do that in a way that doesn't necessarily follow the rules is not necessarily because they don't know. And so that's kind of what that article gets into, is that it's more about just the time of it, or the trying to fit everything into the small space that they have with social media and texting and things. And so that was kind of interesting to see that aspect of the grammar, and kind of how it's affecting their grammar skills. And then two of the sources that I found also talk about the effects of social media and texting on spelling skills. And again, these sources kind of talk about how it's not always a intentional thing. A lot of times they're just either going way too fast and they make an error, or it's not necessarily that they don't know the spelling, it's just they're trying to shorten words to, like I said again, make it fit into their Twitter box that they're trying to tweet out. And so a lot of times it's not even that they don't know, it's just the fact of the situation and what they're the way that they're trying to communicate it, calls for shorter words and things like that. And so it was kind of interesting to see how people are, how they're talking about these effects on teens, and versus when they're writing in the classroom, and how we can even use this type of writing that is not the standard in the classroom to engage them and to try to get their interest. Okay, so I think I've addressed each of the sources that I have so far, and each one is kind of just talking about pretty much either the effects of, on different types of writing skills that texting and social media is kind of having on these kids, and then also my other sources that kind of talk about the teacher side of it, and how we can how that's kind of affecting our teaching as well. So this new language, this digital age, is very influential, not only on our kids, but also on how English teachers specifically really have to teach language. And so I'm really excited to kind of get into this more and research this more, and I hope that I think I'll be able to find even more sources probably to go into this even further. So I would appreciate any kind of comments or anything that you guys, any advice you may have for me for what else I might